What did Warfield publish in 1894 specifically that's a focus of the article you've written, and really why was that piece so significant?
Yeah, he publishes an article called "The Human and the Divine in the Bible," and basically that article is the culmination of his thinking. It's not a long article; it's fairly brief, but it's the culmination of his thinking with regard to the mode of inspiration. In 1880, when he gave that inaugural address, he said in that as to the mode of inspiration, Reformed churches had deemed it inscrutable. Um, he had obviously done a little thinking on it himself because some of the things that he says there are things that are extended a little later. But by the time he gets to 1894, he says what was inscrutable now needs to be fleshed out, and the reason for that is he said the bookshelves that are coming out, or the books that are coming out on the bookshelves nowadays, are filled with this kenotic doctrine of Scripture. In other words, yeah, basically, God has vacated the premises in terms of the doctrine of Scripture, and it's really a human-centered book. A human emphasis is placed on the writing of Scripture by these authors. So, really, 1894, he writes this culminating article on his view of concursus. I think the trigger before that, though, is a book that he reviews by a man by the name of Dykhoff, still not translated into the English language. It was one of those things that I put on my to-do list. You know what I mean? I think at this point in my life, I translate about a sentence a year. But 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 anyway, it was that book that really seems to be the book that ignites him to change his position and come out publicly in defense of concursus as the mode of inspiration.
Explain some of that to us and to the listeners and the different views here, because there's some discussion and debate about concursus, about dictation theory, and about how God does indeed inspire the Bible. So the question of this article isn't whether the Reformers, the Protestant Scholastics, or the Westminster Divines, or Warfield thought the Bible was inerrant or was inspired. The question is how. How did God? What was the mode God used to do that? So and then there's some question about what did Warfield? How did he identify the views of those who had gone before him, and whether he was accurate in doing so? Correct. Let us know a bit about those methods and kind of how those words were used, at least in 1894.
Yeah, the interesting thing about it is Warfield. You have to catch him in the context of his day, and I think ever since Immanuel Kant, he recognizes that there's been a shift in thinking. Immanuel Kant's critique comes along. He realizes that Kant doesn't necessarily deny that there is a God, but by the end of the book, Kant says, if there is a God, he's constituted us, made us in such a way that we can't know him. We can't know he exists, right?
This is about 100 years before Warfield,
yeah,
at least
yeah.
before this article of Warfield's, right?
Yeah, and so Kant comes along and basically says that God isn't a percept. He's not something that I can perceive with my senses. So he's not something that my mind can categorize, and therefore I don't know if he exists. Well, you guys know as well as I do that in the wake of that, you have theologians who come along and bow the knee to Immanuel Kant, Schleiermacher being among them, who says that Kant's right, and the only way that we can get around Immanuel Kant is by having that sense of dependence, that Gefühl, that recognition in our dependence that God is there. And this really leads to a swing in theology, a swing from immanence to transcendence. God is either so immanent that he's in everything. Thought is divine, and emotions are divine. And one writer in Warfield's day even talked about the culture being charged with divinity. And there were those who said God is so transcendent, so removed from creation that, we have to sort of live lives almost as if God is theistic in sort of his orientation toward us. Well, in Warfield's day, immanence was the way that the pendulum had swung. And so Warfield said, when we talk about the source of theology, the source of inspiration, or those sorts of things, that really doesn't get to the issue. What really gets to the issue is the mode of how God has inspired the scriptures. Because if we leave open the idea of mode, then we're basically saying that general and special revelation are conflated. Everything is of God, thought, emotions, culture, all that sort of thing. And so Warfield said, if we're going to really get to the heart of the debate, we need to talk about how it was that God inspired the scriptures. What was the mode he used? And it's certainly different than the way in which he, for instance, reveals himself in the general revelation. And so that was really the background that stands behind it. It's interesting, though, that when you think about, the lead up to the 1880 article with Warfield and Hodge, they say in that article, they say, inspiration has been so loosely used in these discussions that we're going to give it a definite sense. We're going to define it, and we're going to use that definition henceforth. Is that really got underneath Briggs' skin, because Briggs at that point said, you guys are being innovative.
Mm.
And Warfield and Hodge said, we're not being innovative, we're being constructive theologians at this point. We're bringing some biblical constructivity to this whole argument. So that's exactly what they're doing, and that's part of Warfield's understanding of progressive orthodoxy. It's orthodox, but what's progressing is the establishment of an orthodox thinking and construct in terms of the Bible and how we express the Bible's teaching.